Welcome back to When Stars Fill Half the Sky. This is Chapter 13, A Fold in the Fabric of Time. Needless to say, Michael's meeting with Julie didn't go as planned. The general was also very disappointed and wouldn't speak to Michael for months, although a part of him could not hold Michael in full contempt. Leonard Nelson knew better than anyone how Julie was, once she made up her mind about anything. But still, after that brief encounter, there was something very different about his daughter, and the only one he could blame was Michael. There were days and nights that followed where Michael could actually know what she was thinking, and in some cases, what she was even saying or doing. But she continued to fight off any recollection of that encounter, refusing to let anyone or anything interfere with her plans to go to Switzerland. But there was one more reason why he couldn't get her out of his head. Seeing her once again reignited feelings of falling in love and being together. Back in school, he thought she was out of his league and felt too insecure to even try. But that night at the party, when they kissed, everything changed. He saw it in her eyes, and he knew that he had to fight for her. But now she was gone, and he had no idea if he'd ever see her again. Now, once more alone in that comfortable prison, restricted from any outside communication except with the POTUS, who really only wanted to speak with him because of his special gift in exposing her political enemies, Michael fell into deep depression. He thought of the only other person in his life who really ever cared for him, his mother. She was gone as well, in a flash of light, lost in that strange realm that no one knew existed or could even imagine. He still had hope that perhaps in one of his journeys he would see her again, but it had been so long since that time they stood together looking at that strange constellation of lights far beyond the vast chasm of darkness. He went back to that morocel path, ending abruptly into darkness whenever possible. He'd go and just wait there as long as he could, hoping she would return. But nothing ever happened. The half-realm had a way of really pissing him off. Certain subjects and information flowed like a mighty river. There was no stopping it. But in other cases, where you really thought something was necessary to know, nothing. Then finally came that one journey where he saw her again. The reunion was sweet. It was so good to see her. Although no one really ages in the half-realm, it was clear that she'd seen so much more since their last time together. Once again, at the end of that pathway, looking at that faraway cluster of lights, they suddenly realized what it all represented. They were looking at a group of individuals, but this group was different. They were a unique group of beings who never faced physical death. These lights were brighter than any of the other chambers they'd visited. But from their vantage point, that was all they could ascertain because of that impenetrable chasm of darkness. Who do you think they are? I know who they are. Those are the life forces of the ones who vanished on the day of the sun. How do you know that? One time, I went to visit Max Cole's chamber. I wanted to get some answers to some questions that have plagued me for a long time. That light in the center of each chamber, that present eye, when I went to visit Max's chamber, it was gone. His spirit was missing. Then I noticed there were no morocel particles filtering in. All that was there was his chain of past events and memories. But in his very last memory, his last image before vanishing, I saw glimpses of this place. And throughout my journeys, I've seen the same thing. Chambers with no present I, but all having similar memories. They all move into that cluster of lights. It's not the same with everyone who's died. Remember when we visited Joseph Stalin? His present I is still there, dim, but it's there. He's so alone. He longs for any light fragments to enter in, but they can't penetrate his chamber. It's like the membrane walls are hardened and won't allow anything in. He's trapped in there, surrounded by his past memories, most of which torture him constantly. He's in total darkness. Oh, it must be hell. But these spirits, oh, something about them, something about their, I don't know, it's not a religious thing because some of them that are over there, I wouldn't exactly consider them religious. Interesting. What? Sounds like you're describing heaven or something. You always told me there's no God, Mom. What, have you changed your mind? I'm not entirely sure. All I'm saying is, whenever I visited the chambers of people who have died, their present eye is either still in there, barely shining and dim, or it's completely gone. And those that are missing all point to that place. Michael said nothing. He, as well, still had so many unanswered questions. And the one person who might be able to offer some answers never returned after his initial meeting with Gloria in her office. Sensing that this particular journey was stable enough, they both decided to explore yet another chamber. It was time to find out the truth about the historic figure Jesus. Sure enough, he did have a chamber, just like any other chamber. They entered it. They were not surprised that his present eye was missing. Only his memories remained. They started rummaging through them and were amazed, especially the memories of the last few years of his life. Each memory, each pearl, was full of incredible accounts similar to the events they'd heard about or seen in famous paintings or popular movies. They were both back in time, viewing the cradle of civilization like two tourists on holiday. But now, as they followed Jesus' days, they started to see a whole new perspective on the past events that formed so much of their history. This man was not a writer, yet more books were written about him than any other person. He never wrote a song, yet more songs had been sung about him than anyone else. He'd never started his own business or seemed to be too concerned about making money, yet more entrepreneurs laid homage to his legacy than any other person in history. In only 3 short years, he generated a following that never lost steam and continued to inspire countless numbers right on up to their present time. However, it didn't take long for them to realize that people never change. Human minds always seem to gravitate to 2 extremes, love or fear. And like magnetic poles, these extremes always repel each other strongly. They saw it as they watched crowds flocking to Jesus. His love for them was so deep, you could feel it. But the religious leaders around him were threatened by this, and so they feared the loss of their power more than they desired to understand his love. The crowds continued to grow, causing the leaders to resort to desperate means in order to stop him. But the first memory they explored was the most impactful for them because of all the images etched in their minds. This one was the most human. There he was, walking along the bank of the Sea of Galilee with that very particular and recognizable gait to his step, almost clumsily or haphazardly approaching along the shoreline. He looked no different than anyone else in that busy fisherman's village. Nothing about him glowing, no evidence of morocel or anything extraterrestrial. The thing that completely caught them off guard, though, was that he was aware of their presence. He wouldn't exactly talk to them because there were a lot of people around. But as he passed by, he looked at them and winked. He started talking to some fishermen who had a bad day at sea. Somehow, Jesus convinced them to go back out. Later, after returning with their best catch ever, the one named Simon was starting to realize there was something very special about this guy. Gloria and Michael continued to watch Jesus' popularity grow, not because of his political power or intellectual prowess, not even because of the miraculous things he was able to do, but simply because he genuinely cared for people and spoke to them in ways that no other leader ever dared. Jesus really made them feel as if their lives mattered. He would often refer to the Mosaic laws, not as a list of do's and don'ts, but as opportunities to observe and appreciate the good things in life and to show them how to avoid the bad. He challenged them to love one another and then told them of a kingdom where they would all be rulers and highly esteemed citizens. This started to really tick off the religious leaders. Steadily, it started to drive them mad. One time, after healing someone who was blind from birth, they grilled the young man, asking him how Jesus was able to do this. They accused Jesus of being a magician or a heretic and asked the formerly blind man how such a person could have the power to heal. He finally threw up his hands and said, "Look, all I know is I was blind, and now I see." Later, they found Jesus and argued with him because he was talking about that other kingdom again, the one they couldn't see, the one they were completely threatened by. He used the analogy of a good shepherd and how the sheep respond only to his voice, not to others calling them. Then he said, "I have other sheep that are not of this fold. I must bring them in as well, and they will listen to my voice. Then there will be one flock and one shepherd. The reason the Father loves me is that I lay down my life in order to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down and authority to take it up again." Well, this threw the religious leaders into hysterics. Gloria and Michael never saw grown men so enraged. They started throwing rocks and tried to grab him, but there was a huge crowd of sympathetic followers who held them back, making it possible for Jesus and his disciples to slip away in the midst of all the confusion. Of all the people Gloria and Michael Fiveland visited in the half-realm, none compared to this man, because although his life was short, he was obviously and clearly special. Sometimes they knew his thoughts, other times his thoughts were completely unobtainable. In moments when they were alone, they tried to talk with him, but for the most part, he would intentionally ignore the travelers, even though they knew he was aware of them. Finally, there was one night. His disciples were all asleep, and he was quietly staring into the dying embers of the campfire. "I noticed you keep searching for morocel here," he said without lifting his eyes in their direction. "But that is not what you should be seeking. There is something greater, something that governs all of existence. You will discover what I am saying if you keep your hearts open. What created all that you see is not a thing, not a force, but a person. You both are privileged to view all this from a perspective that no one else will ever get to see or understand. Keep your minds and your hearts open, and you will find what you seek." Jesus stood up and dusted himself off. He walked over to a pile of supplies and grabbed a blanket, preparing to turn in for the night. "Are you the Son of God?" Michael asked plainly. "Son, you remember what I said the other day about the sheep hearing their shepherd? I am the good shepherd. All that I say will come to pass, and all that my Father asks of me, I do. Come watch tomorrow and see for yourself." Early the next morning, Jesus took 3 of his disciples to a nearby mountain. He told them where to wait as he continued further to a clearing nearby. Then, suddenly, the morocel in the travelers' hands came alive like never before. They instinctively raised their arms as sprays of light were directed toward the lone figure. Jesus' garments started to glow like silks, but even brighter. They had to shield their eyes at times from the intense brilliance. Suddenly, two other unrecognizable figures appeared, and everyone fell to their faces. The disciples later referred to the two men as the prophet Elijah and the patriarch Moses. They had a private conversation with Jesus for about 10 minutes, while Michael and Gloria, from their vantage point, saw a vessel hovering nearby. Both travelers had seen ships like that one from previous journeys, from the first world. Then, out of nowhere, came a thunderous voice, and everyone heard it. It was a decipherable voice, not necessarily an actual voice, but more like a knowing or a discernment deep inside. They were all aware that someone greater and more powerful than anyone or anything they'd ever experienced was making himself known. Once again, they all fell to their faces as the voice spoke.
This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Listen to him.
Everything went quiet after that. As eyes slowly opened, Moses and Elijah were gone. The glowing morocel had vanished, and Jesus stood alone. He walked back over to his friends in that familiar, clumsy way and lifted them back up to their feet, imploring them not to discuss what they had just seen with anyone until after his death. They didn't understand why, but they obeyed him nonetheless. Around the same time, one of the lesser-known Pharisees, whose name was Mier, became a person of interest to the travelers, as both were sure there was no historical record of this man. They saw him always near the side of the high priest, whispering in his ear. Suddenly they realized there was something different about this Pharisee, for he was not simply just a religious leader of the time. He was the current host for the collective. It was Mier who fanned the flames of fear into the mind of the high priest and his council. It was he who convinced them that they were losing their power over the masses. Mier knew how Jesus' message would thwart the collective's plans and did everything in his power to stop it. He was there when Jesus was wrongly arrested and sentenced to death for crimes never committed. How horrible it was to witness his crucifixion and burial. But then the travelers watched as Jesus broke free of the grave 3 days later and reappeared to his disciples. Then finally, as he rose into the sky, he promised them that he would never leave them and that the same power that accomplished all they'd seen would live inside of them forever. Mier watched, powerless, swearing he would get his revenge on all of those who dared to perpetuate this message. He was fearful of the message that Jesus' followers would soon be spreading, and over the next few centuries, the collective would do everything in its power to try and extinguish Jesus' words. Finally, as they all watched Jesus disappearing into the sky, Gloria turned to Michael and said something he would never forget. This is what Silta could never understand. This is what he came to try and figure out. They didn't have this. They didn't have him. They just never knew. Didn't know what? This connection, Michael. A connection based on love. Real, pure love. The kind of love that Jesus had. The kind of love that generates faith in doubting hearts and hope in hopeless situations. Love is powerful, more powerful than any type of shared connection, even more powerful than the morocel. Look at Silta and his race. They only had the morocel connection, but where did it get them? Don't you see, Michael? The morocel to them was just an instrument, a source of energy. Just something to help them develop their society and extend their lives. But that's all. We had it too in our age. It was called the Tree of Life. Jesus, he said He was the tree of life. The ancient books referred to it, too. It was in the Garden of Eden, but it had to be removed for thousands of years so that we could learn a different way. It was all by design. The plan has always been for us to live by faith. Faith, the evidence of things unseen, the substance of things hoped for, Michael uttered as those words passed his lips for the first time. Exactly. Michael, this is why we never had the morocel. We were being protected from it. We would have turned out no different than Mond, like him searching constantly for that meaningless pursuit of power and control. Never before had Michael ever seen his mother so convicted, so passionate, so excited about anything. The light in her eyes told the whole story. He knew she'd never be the same. But then something happened, something totally unexpected. Oh my God, she cried as they were being pulled back up into the chambers of the eternal present, taken immediately to that abrupt end of the morocel pathway just before the distant cluster of lights. They looked at each other one last time, and then suddenly, without warning, Gloria was ripped away across that great chasm into the crowd of brilliantly shining souls. "Mom!" he yelled, but it was too late. He tried to follow her, but he couldn't. The chasm was too great. In desperation, he tried to throw himself into the darkness, but it was as if there was an invisible wall holding him back. Helplessly, he stood there, alone for what felt like hours, not knowing what to do. Another figure slowly approached.
Gloria has finally joined them as I have suspected,
said a voice foreign to him, yet, oddly enough, he knew who it was. It was the voice of that alien being, the one responsible for all of this. It was Silta. Did you summon us here or something?
No, I have no such authority in this place. The morocel.
The morocel. The morocel, Michael interrupted indignantly. Unabashedly, he strided up to within inches of Silta's face and continued. To fucking hell with the morocel!
For sure, your distress is warranted. Your mother became involved in a situation she did not solicit, and now you have been left without her.
There's no going back. My life, my world as I knew it, it'll never be the same, he answered, trying to hold back his anger. Michael had never wanted to strike anyone as much as he did at that moment. He could feel himself falling out of the half-realm, but he didn't care. He just wanted some sense of retribution for all the pain he'd endured ever since Silta showed up in their lives. So he swung and landed a hard right hook onto Silta's face. The alien was unaffected. He swung again and once again made contact. Finally, the third time, Silta stopped his fist with an open hand and held it firmly in place.
You must stop for your own good. I know that you blame me, but the crossing of our paths has a greater significance. You are not the only one to suffer loss. This is not about you, nor is it about me or my dying race. We are all simply drops in an ocean. What is significant is that a unique opportunity has been given us. We must find the origin of the morocel. Nothing else matters.
Isn't it clear to you? The morocel was made by God. What else do you need to know?
I am not yet prepared to acquiesce to your notions of deity Our society has always been based on facts, not emotionally charged opinions.
You say that, but your whole society is based on something you know nothing about. And that's a fact. Silta was speechless. No matter what he could say, the truth was inescapable. He hung his head slowly and scanned the morocel pathway ending abruptly before them. Again, he thought about the current plight of his world. There were no words in English, Gothawadan, or any other language to properly communicate the level of hopelessness for a people so advanced and yet so out of control.
Tell me, what did you and your mother learn?
We met someone in the half-realm who was aware of our presence. You should go back and visit him as well. His name is
Do not mention that name. I know who you are referring to, but that name will only hasten a quick ending to this journey. That name is the reason your world was banned from our records. The elders of my world have proclaimed any slight utterance of it warrants a death sentence immediately.
Death sentence? Just for mentioning a name? From beings that claim to be so much more advanced than us? It was clear Silta wanted to say more but was unable to. Michael scratched an area of vulnerability that had been covered for way too long. Well, just like my mother found out, the answer is found in that name. I know it, and now you know it too. Isn't it obvious to you why your elders are so set against you finding out more?
I agree. Yet here you are, still unable to transcend this darkness and join your mother. So it appears we both have unfinished matters to tend to. There is only one option for both of us. We must travel further back in time before the advent of that person. This will make it more difficult for the collective to recognize our intentions. But time is running out for me. I will need a guide through your early history. Will you join me in this quest?
Michael looked back out again, gazing into the chasm. He had already been back as far as Teleria. Part of him wanted to return there, and yet there was still so much anger and angst. Suddenly, he felt himself starting to fall out of his trance as Area 70 started to reappear.
Look for Enoch in the first world,
Silta called as his image started to disintegrate.
I will find you when you find him.
Michael reached to grab hold of Silta, but it was too late. His journey was terminated. When he regained consciousness, he was once again lying in his bed. General Nelson was in his room. Something was wrong, and Michael knew what it was. The general said nothing but reached out and gave him a handwritten note. The message, cryptically handwritten by a daughter to her father, was instantly clear to Michael.
Dad, I'm in danger. Please help me.
In the next chapter, we learn about the perils and tribulations Julie endured after going to work for the New World Alliance in Switzerland. Michael pulls out all the stops to try and rescue her.